Hello, thank you. And can I say, Glynis, that was very motivating. Um, Hi, so my name is Celine. I'm a research assistant with McEwen University. And this was done under doctors Leanne Hedberg and Micah Rajanov, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. Um, but yeah, this study was about looking at 2S LGBTQ entrepreneurs across Canada and how they experience and navigate entrepreneurship. We conducted one major study that included 29 in-depth interviews, and the findings generated two connected reports. But today I'll weave some of those key findings into one argument. The wounds that we as queer people have from being othered, from not being accepted, not knowing, not having a language, not seeing ourselves in the world, these wounds at one point sting and hurt and are continually bleeding. And then at a certain point, they become invitations to live in another way of being, into bringing new connection into the world, of understanding your own bodies and others in whole new ways. This was a quote from one of our interviewers, and we're going to come back to this one at the end, but I'd like everybody to hold this image: wounds that become invitations. So as I said, 29 interviews, semi-structured, 45 to 90 minutes each, conducted largely online with 2S LGBTQ entrepreneurs across Canada. So that includes here in Edmonton, and really all over North Yukon, remote communities, as well as urban centers like Toronto, Vancouver, etc. And this used an interpretive qualitative design and thematic analysis, looking at the experiences, needs, and practices of entrepreneurs in Canada, 2S LGBTQI entrepreneurs in Canada. And these were also done alongside the field reports from the larger project that included interviews with community providers and folks in the entrepreneurship services or queer services space. And those were done by Micah Rajanov and available on the REC website. All right, so firstly, constraints. We all know that the queer community faces struggles, systemic barriers, etc. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's known, and I think most of us, if not all of us, are aware of the many struggles that come with our identities. That said, it warrants a bit of discussion in terms of key themes. So, identity, visibility, labor, and being safe. This was something that was seen a lot in the literature, or not in literature, in the findings. And participants described constant decisions about whether to be out or not to clients, funders, networks, and at what cost. And that looked very different for different people, based on their own experiences, their geographic realities, um, you know, um, and many different themes. Um, and some folks mentioned being misgendered by otherwise supportive clients, feeling not taken seriously without overt hostility in former workplaces or even in their current work. There's also ecosystem gaps. A dual gap was seen. Mainstream business ecosystems lacking basic transliteracy or knowledge on how to serve queer communities unless they make those specific efforts. While queer-specific organizations focusing more on housing and health, which are very important, of course, but don't have that entrepreneurship component. And one quote here captures it very well. I didn't really tap into any resources in the LGBTQ community. I didn't know there were any, and to be honest, as a person of color from the generation where we don't really talk about our sexuality and we don't really celebrate it with our families because it's still fairly taboo. And these aren't individual struggles, they're predictable outcomes of systems not built with us in mind. But entrepreneurship itself becomes resistance, community care, and self-preservation. Across both reports, we saw varied and complex ways that entrepreneurs responded to this. And there are 4 themes that I want to highlight, which I found really important and compelling. So, community as strategic infrastructure. Community functions as primary economic infrastructure. It's not supplementary to business activity. It's foundational to it. The community is my market. That is where I've had sales. That is where I position myself. That's where I focus. Someone else mentioned, I've had to access resources that don't super land, and then I bring them to colleagues who are more value aligned, and we sort of take what sticks and leave what doesn't. This captures a filtering practice, also known as bricolage, making do and adapting what's available, accessing mainstream resources that don't super land, and then workshopping them with value-aligned peers, taking what works, discarding what doesn't. Participants are also building alternative infrastructure from scratch, meeting circles, intercommunity trade networks, curated queer markets. So the community doesn't just provide belonging. It provides a filter and a sounding board for tools, and in many cases, builds the tools themselves and promotes the physical spaces themselves where this is happening. Peer networks and chosen family as professional infrastructure. One quote says as well, Joe has been a best friend of mine for about 10 years, and he was like, cool, here's literally everything. This shows us just how quickly people are ready and willing to step into these informal mentorship roles. Encouraging community members to find a way to monetize what they're good at, peer mentorship. It's about receiving and giving support and passing it on. And we saw this as generative. So chosen family functions as emotional support, mentorship, accountability, and business resource. Online communities were also mentioned, repurposing of online spaces that are typically used for other uses, niche communities on Reddit, Facebook groups for intersectional business communities, making business deals on Grindr, platforms repurposed as professional infrastructure. Yes. And the boundary here between chosen family and professional support in many cases didn't always exist, and they didn't necessarily want it to exist. And economic solidarity based on shared values. This was also a really major theme. Purchasing solidarity, economic solidarity, and active inclusion. Someone said, if there's anybody in the trans community that's having issues finding a job, they can come work for me. We saw cooperation over competition. People wanted to support their people and make a difference. And we saw some of that in everyone we talked to. There are some tensions worth naming in this. Someone described asymmetrical mentorship. They said, I do so much, but I've never been given an opportunity for being the mentee. And also naming, knowledge that should flow freely. And some of these entrepreneurs recognize that they want to be able to offer more for free, but they have to monetize things under economic pressure. So there's a tension between these ethics and survival. And redefining success. This was something major. Someone said, we would rather fail as a gay bar than succeed as a non-gay bar. That's a principled inversion of conventional success logic. And then, do you like your job? Do you want to go to work every day? That was a direct response to being asked what success looks like. Daily joy and psychological safety as core metrics. So we've documented these redefinitions of success and death and argue that these redefinitions require a fundamental rethinking of how we design entrepreneurship support. If success means something different to these entrepreneurs, then support systems measured only by revenue growth or business survival will miss the point. And they're not failing to achieve conventional success. They're rejecting the definition and putting their own definition based on individual and shared values and the meaning of success is radically defined across these narratives, shifting from financial metrics to authenticity, emotional fulfillment, values alignment, and relational impact. So, to conclude, queer entrepreneurs have built this complex alternative infrastructure where formal support didn't exist, rooted in community, mutual aid, and shared identity. And this shows that our communities have organically built mechanisms because they've had to. That said, having to do this much building is tiring, and in some cases hasn't been due to choice. And that's a pretty big burden to carry, to exist just as you are, in safety. So I want to return to this quote. The wounds that we as queer people have from being othered, from not being accepted, not knowing, not having language, not seeing ourselves in the world. Those wounds at one point sting and hurt and are continually bleeding. And then at a certain point, they become invitations to live in another way of being, into bringing new connection into the world, of understanding your own bodies and others in whole new ways. When we opened with these words, these wounds were present tense. What the participants showed us is the second part, the invitation, the building of new ways of being. Thank you.